Hello everyone, this is Norm Jones at Brigham Young University, and for this exercise we are going to get an introduction in how to use for loops to do iteration in Visual Basic. And there are a number of different ways you can write loops. If you've read the chapter associated with this exercise in the Excel VBA primer, you know that we can do for loops. There are two different types of for loops. There's a for each loop and a for I equals loop, and that's what we're reviewing today. You can also use what are called do loops, and that will be the subject of another sequence of exercises. So first we're going to do a few exercises focusing just on for loops. And for this particular exercise, we are going to write a loop that starts in row 3, column A, and iterates through each of these cells in sequence and calculates the inverse of the value in the cell, so 1 over the value, and then it writes that inverse value back to the cell. So it's basically we're going to replace the contents of range A3 through A20 with each value replaced by 1 over the original value. And of course this would not work if any of these values were 0, because you can't do 1 over 0, but that's not the case, so this should work. And we're going to start out by solving this problem using a for each loop. And so let's go into design mode and double click on this for each button. And as you may recall, we looked at a for each loop in an earlier exercise, and a for each loop is used to iterate through each object in a collection. And a range of cells is a collection, so that will work for us here. And I'm going to go up to the top of my code and I'm going to type option explicit. That is always a good idea whenever you're going to use variables. And we do need to use variables in this case, because when you use a for each loop, we always need a looping variable. So we're going to say dim my cell as range. And so we're going to start out by declaring or dimensioning a looping variable, and the type for that is range, because each of the cells in the range is as a range of the range we're going to iterate through as a range object. And then we're going to start our loop, and these cells are again in A3 through A20. So we're going to type for each my cell in range A3 colon A20. So this is how you start out the first line of a for each loop. You give it the looping variable as your first item here. That's the name of your looping variable, and then the last item needs to be a collection, which is a set of objects, and that allows you to iterate through each of the individual objects inside that collection. And then you inside the loop, whenever you reference my cell, it is referring to one of the instances or objects inside that collection. So we're going to say my cell dot value equals 1 over my cell dot value, and then next my cell. So there we are. You always conclude a for each loop with a next statement, and where you say next and then the name of your looping variable. Now everything between the for statement and the next statement is iterated or is executed once each time you go through the at each iteration of this loop. And so again, when you do that, my cell is an alias for the current value that you're looking at inside the cell or inside the range in this particular case. So this should work. Let's try it, and then we'll come back and talk about it a little more. So I'm going to save the changes there, and we're going to exit design mode and There you go. Every time I click on that, it executes that loop, and it goes through and iterates through that set of cells and replaces it with 1 over the original value. Now I want to show you something. I'm gonna resize the window here a little bit, and I'm gonna resize this so we can see both of these at once. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a breakpoint, and I want to step through this in the debug mode so that you can understand how this works. So it's paused at the top of this loop. My cell is nothing, meaning it hasn't been assigned to anything yet. And I'm going to click on the F8 key on the keyboard, and we're going to step over this one at a time. So first time through here, this corresponds to 48.13. I'm going to do something else here. I'm going to add what's called a watch for my cell. And then let's see if we can actually, let me do that a little bit differently. I'm going to add a watch for my cell.value, so I don't have to look at all of the other stuff. So down here you'll see we have created our watch. Let's see, my cell, let me get rid of that first watch, delete that one. So, okay, so now all we see is this one. And I'm doing that so as I step through this, I want you to keep track of this value down here. And now I'm going to the next cell, and it's 83.4, so it's pointing at this one. And then it is 75.9, so it's pointing at this one. I just want to illustrate as I walk through that now. I just keep iterating and hitting the F8 key, and it's just cycling through each of those from top to bottom in that range, and eventually it's going to get down to the last one, 18.98, and at that point we're at the end, so there's no more cells in the range, and so it goes to the next line and we're done. So that's basically how a for each loop works. Now let's do the same thing, or solve the same problem using a for I equals loop. So let's see if I can do this. Go back to design mode, and I'm going to double click on this button right here. So now we are going to solve the same problem. Instead of using the for each loop, we're going to use a for I equals loop. So we're going to dimension I as integer, and now what we want to do is we want to use the for I equals loop to loop from row 3 to 20. So we're going to say for I equals 3 to 20. I'm going to tab over, and we're going to say cells I comma 1 dot value equals 1 over cells I comma 1 dot value. So again, we're taking the inverse, and then next I. And so this should do the same thing, but in this case we're using a different technique. The for I equals loop iterates an integer from one value to another value, and in this case this variable I represents the row that we're looking at, and we're going to use the cells object to reference the corresponding cell based on its row number and its column number. So they're all in column 1, so the second argument to cells is 1, and the first argument is I, which is the row counter. So the first time through this loop I will be 3, and then 4, and then 5, and so forth. And so this should work. Let's exit design mode, and once again it behaves just the same way as the for I each loop. And we're going to put a breakpoint there and kind of step through this. So now I want to create a watch for I, and we're going to hit the F8 key. And if you watch down here as I iterate, I is just iterating between 3 and 20, and you can see the changes that occur over here on the right, and it just progresses down one I at a time, and it keeps going, and at some point I is equal to 20, so right now it's 18, 19, 20, and at this point it'll increment to 21 and it'll jump out of the loop and go to the end of the sub, and we're done. So as you can see, let me resize that back over. This works either way. You can use a for each loop or a for I equals loop, and in this case either solution will work, and it's just a different way to iterate through a set of cells. Sometimes just given the context it makes more sense to use a for each loop. Sometimes it's more intuitive, makes more sense to use a for I equals loop, and sometimes it's just a matter of taste, you know, which method seems most intuitive to you. But in this particular case, we're able to solve this problem equally well using either the for each loop or the for I equals loop.